When people talk about manifestation, they tend to picture something absurdly cinematic. You close your eyes, clench your fists, and poof, a cheeseburger appears. Or your bank account suddenly grows 6 zeros overnight because you aligned your energy. It's often treated like a wish list delivered to the universe, where belief acts as the shipping fee. But with that kind of understanding, it's pretty much guaranteed to disappoint. No wonder so many people write it off as spiritual mumbo-jumbo. And to be fair, a lot of it is. But buried beneath the crystals and dream boards is a quieter, sturdier idea. One that doesn't require faith in the cosmos, just a better look at your own brain. Because the truth is, most people have manifested something. They just didn't call it that. A job you got after weeks of visualizing the interview. A conversation that turned because you prepared your response. A habit you built without realizing it started with a single decision. These aren't magical, they're mechanical, and they're already happening right now in your own mind. That's where attention comes in. The brain doesn't show you everything. It can't. There's too much data, too much noise. So instead, it gives you a spotlight, a narrow beam of focus, always moving, always filtering. And what that spotlight lands on, it becomes your version of reality, not the reality, just yours. If your focus is on failure, you'll spot the cracks. If it's on possibility, you'll start to see the open windows. This is not positivity fluff. It's basic cognitive processing, and it has consequences. Because attention is more than observation. It's reinforcement. What you notice becomes what you remember. What you remember shapes what you expect. What you expect changes how you act. And how you act, surprisingly often, influences what actually happens next. So no, you're not a wizard. You're not summoning things out of thin air. But you are shaping your experience, bit by bit, thought by thought. The spotlight doesn't just reveal the stage, it sets the tone. And once you realize you're the one holding it, things get interesting. Now, let's go deeper, because that spotlight, it's only the beginning. Expectation is one of those things that sounds harmless, soft, passive, like something that sits quietly in the corner of your mind and waits to be proven right or wrong. But the truth is, expectation doesn't wait. It leads. It steps into the room before you do. It filters what you see, how you interpret it, and what you decide to do about it. If you've ever braced for bad news, then felt the tension in your body long before anything actually happened, you've already seen this in action. The mind doesn't just observe reality, it prepares for it, and that preparation is often based on what it expects to find. This is why two people can enter the same situation and walk away with entirely different experiences. One sees challenge, the other sees threat. One sees a chance, the other sees a trap. The difference isn't in the facts, it's in the forecast. The expectation acts like a lens, tinting every detail just slightly, enough to change how it lands, how it feels, and what happens next. It's not delusion. It's selective construction. The brain has to filter something, so it defaults to what feels familiar. And what feels familiar is often what's been repeated the most. That's the quiet power of expectation. It doesn't shout, it nudges. You expect to be ignored, so you keep your voice down. You expect to fail, so you hesitate. You expect to be liked, so you smile first. And those tiny adjustments, They change how the world responds, not because the world bends to your belief, but because your behavior does. And behavior is a loud signal. Now, this isn't a pep talk. We're not saying you can expect your way into a beachfront condo, but the expectation that something might be possible, that's enough to open a door that would otherwise go unnoticed, or at the very least, keep you from walking right past it. Expectation isn't a magical tool, it's a perceptual one, and it's running quietly in the background of almost everything you do. So if you're already wearing a lens, you might as well check what color it is, because reality may not change instantly. But the way you meet it, that can shift the whole interaction. The human brain is obsessed with patterns, not just good at spotting them, wired for it. That rustle in the bushes could be a predator, or wind, or lunch. But better to assume a pattern than miss one and get eaten. That's the evolutionary deal we've struck. Pattern over precision. It's why we see faces in toast, constellations in the stars, and signs in license plates when we're having a rough day. The brain doesn't like blank space. It fills it, often with meaning. And that meaning doesn't have to be true. It just has to fit the narrative we're already telling ourselves. This is where manifestation often sneaks into the conversation. You think about someone, and they text you. Coincidence? Probably. But if it happens when you're already tuned into the idea that your thoughts shape reality, then it feels like a message, a wink from the universe. Maybe even a confirmation that your mind has powers. But what's really happening is more mechanical than mystical. You're spotting patterns, and once your brain starts looking for one, it gets very good at finding it, especially if it helps complete the story you've already started writing. And that story? It's not just background noise. It's the framework for how you interpret the world. A flat tire becomes bad luck if you're already feeling cursed. A compliment feels suspicious if you've already decided you're unlikable. Same events, different meanings. Pattern seeking isn't a flaw. It's a shortcut. It saves time. It helps you navigate chaos by telling you, this is like that, so you can respond the same way. It reduces the need to think fresh every time. But shortcuts aren't neutral. They're shaped by what you believed before. And those prior beliefs shape the patterns you're most likely to recognize. That's how someone can manifest rejection over and over, because they're primed to notice it, interpret it, and act accordingly. It's not magic. It's meaning-making on autopilot. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "See, I knew that would happen," pause. Ask yourself, did I recognize a pattern, or did I construct one? Because in most cases, it's both. And the tricky part is, the moment your brain draws that line between two dots, it gets harder not to follow it again. There's something quietly powerful about expectation. Not in the mystical, put it out into the universe way, but in the way it changes how your body, mind, and behavior prepare. Expectation is a lens, a subtle one. But once it's in place, everything is tinted by it. Picture this. You're walking into a room where you expect to be welcomed. You stand a little taller. Your voice smooths out. You make eye contact without thinking about it. The room hasn't changed. The people haven't changed. But your posture toward the moment has. Now reverse it. You expect to be ignored, dismissed, maybe even disliked. Suddenly your tone stiffens. You shrink a little. You second guess when to speak. The result? The energy you carry often evokes a matching response. And here's where the quiet feedback loop begins. You expect rejection, so you behave in ways that make connection harder. Then you get rejection, and now your expectation feels confirmed. But the confirmation came from behavior shaped by the expectation itself. It's not a trap, it's a loop. This isn't about thinking positive or pretending everything's fine. It's about understanding how subtly expectation bleeds into action. When you expect struggle, you brace. When you expect boredom, you disengage. When you expect things to go wrong, you mentally rehearse failure. And rehearsed failure tends to perform well. On the flip side, expecting success, quietly, without pressure, nudges your brain into a different stance. You plan differently. You notice openings instead of obstacles. You respond with curiosity instead of dread. It doesn't guarantee success, but it opens a door to it. And sometimes that's the difference. There's even research showing that the brain begins to simulate expected outcomes ahead of time. It pre-activates neural pathways related to the belief. Meaning, expectation isn't just a mood, it's a rehearsal. One that influences how the real moment unfolds. Of course, expectations can also blind us. You can expect something so strongly that you miss what's actually happening. That's the other edge of the sword. But awareness helps. If you know you're carrying an expectation, you can question it, adjust it, even soften it. So maybe manifestation isn't about expecting miracles. Maybe it's about noticing the expectations you already have and how much they're quietly steering the wheel. Because if you're going to be rehearsing something anyway, it might as well be something that moves you forward. The human mind loves a shortcut. It's not trying to be lazy. It's just efficient. It filters. It generalizes. It fills in gaps before you even notice they're missing. And while this saves mental energy, it also creates a problem. You often don't see reality as it is. You see it as your brain expects it to be. Enter cognitive bias. This is the mind's tendency to favor information that confirms what it already believes. It's not about being stubborn. It's about being consistent. The brain doesn't like dissonance. It doesn't want to hold conflicting ideas in the same space for long. So if you believe the world is harsh, your attention naturally sharpens toward evidence of hardship. If you believe people are unreliable, your mind becomes a magnet for moments that prove it. The rest, it fades into the background. And here's where things get sneakier. Those beliefs influence your behavior. You might hold back from trusting someone. You might avoid taking a risk. You might not even realize you're doing it. But your actions quietly shift in response to the belief, not the reality. Over time, those behaviors provoke reactions from the world around you. People respond to your guardedness. Opportunities don't come knocking because you never showed the door. You assume it's proof your belief was right. But in reality, it was your bias driving the result. This is what psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy. It starts as a suspicion, becomes a lens, influences your choices, and those choices shape the outcomes that eventually confirm the original suspicion. The belief builds the behavior builds the evidence, and around you go. But here's the thing, bias isn't permanent. You can't erase it, but you can interrupt it. You can learn to spot the pattern. Ask yourself, what am I assuming here? What am I looking for without realizing it? The goal isn't to eliminate bias, it's to dilute it, to recognize that sometimes your brain is just showing you the world it already believes in. So when it comes to manifestation, maybe it's less about attracting outcomes and more about interrupting the ones you've unknowingly been scripting all along. Because the future doesn't have to repeat the past, especially if you stop rehearsing it on autopilot. The brain is a bit of a show-off, but it likes to cheat. Once it decides something is true, it starts quietly stacking the deck in its favor. You don't see the world neutrally. You see it through a filter shaped by what you already believe. And your attention, it's not impartial. It's a spotlight that tends to light up whatever fits your existing story. This is called selective attention. You've experienced it. Buy a new car, and suddenly you see that exact model everywhere. Get your heart broken, and every love song suddenly feels like a direct attack. The pattern isn't new. It's just that your mind's filter shifted, and now certain things are catching the light. The same principle applies to self-image. If you believe you're awkward, your brain becomes an expert at noticing every fumbled sentence. If you believe people don't like you, you'll catch every glance that might mean rejection and ignore the 9 others that didn't. You could get 10 compliments in a day and 1 sideways look. And guess which one your brain decides to print and hang on the fridge. This isn't because your mind wants to hurt you. It's just trying to be consistent. Cognitive dissonance, holding 2 contradictory beliefs, is uncomfortable. So your attention aligns with what you've already assumed. That's how a confirmation loop starts. The belief influences what you notice. What you notice reinforces the belief, round and round, until it starts to feel like truth. But it's not. It's just a very persuasive pattern. And here's where it connects back to manifestation. Because if you begin to gently shift your attention, even slightly, the loop starts to bend. Not with forced positivity, but with subtle reframing. You might start noticing something good for once, a moment of support, a brief success, a sign that your assumption may not be as airtight as you thought. At first, it'll feel fake, like you're forcing something that isn't real. But if you keep nudging your attention, keep looking for signals of possibility instead of doom, your brain will start to adapt. It'll say, oh, this is what we're paying attention to now, and it'll start stacking a new deck. So maybe the trick isn't to change your mind all at once. Maybe it's to change your focus, slowly, repetitively, until the loop you live inside starts echoing something new. The brain isn't made of stone. It's not a set of wires soldered in childhood and left to rust. It's alive, messy, soft, and responsive. Every thought, every pattern, every small choice you repeat is like a gardener with a hose deciding which part of the brain gets watered. Over time, the neural pathways you walk most often become smoother, stronger, and easier to follow. This is neuroplasticity, your brain's quiet, consistent ability to restructure itself based on what you rehearse. Here's the thing. Most people aren't aware they're rehearsing. You think a thought once, maybe, I'm bad at this, and then it comes up again and again. Soon enough, that trail through the grass has turned into a trench. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. And the brain, like most of us at a grocery store, will always go where it's easiest. Negativity loves a shortcut. Worry becomes streamlined. Self-doubt becomes efficient. Eventually, you don't even think about it consciously. It just happens, like muscle memory. The path is carved, the neurons are firing in sequence, and the story plays on autopilot. But if the brain can carve out a groove for anxiety, it can carve one for possibility too. That's the part people forget. You're not stuck with your most practiced thoughts. You can build new patterns. At first, they'll feel awkward, like trying to dance in unfamiliar shoes. But with repetition, gentle, non-performative repetition, the trail gets clearer. Think of it like blazing a new path through tall grass. The first few times you walk it, it's slow and annoying. You trip, you get scratched. You think, this is dumb, the old path was easier. But if you keep walking it, especially when the stakes are low, it slowly becomes the new default. You don't need to bulldoze the whole field. You just need to walk it again tomorrow. This is the unglamorous side of manifestation. Not instant results, not cosmic favors. Just the brain doing what it's always done. Responding to pattern and practice. Repeating what's rehearsed. And yes, some brains have thicker grass. Some trails take longer. But neuroplasticity is not a gift for the chosen few. It's the operating system behind all change. So the question isn't, can I think differently? It's, what am I making easier to think tomorrow by what I keep rehearsing today? There's a quiet difference between thinking a thought and becoming it. And that difference is identity. You can think you're bad at public speaking, and maybe that means you're nervous in front of crowds. But once that thought becomes, I'm just not the kind of person who can speak well, you've crossed a subtle but powerful threshold. Now it's not a behavior, it's a definition. Identity is sticky. The brain likes consistency even more than it likes accuracy. Once you accept a story about yourself, the mind gets to work reinforcing it. Like an overzealous intern trying to make your life into a coherent narrative. You hit snooze and don't feel bad about it, because you're not a morning person. You dodge budgeting because you're bad with money. These aren't just excuses. They're mirrors you've looked into long enough to forget you're allowed to turn away. And this mirror, it reflects back more than you think. Your posture, your choices, your tone, they all subtly bend to match the identity you've accepted. The mind says, ah, yes, this fits. And the body follows. Soon, you're not just feeling like someone who procrastinates. You're acting like one. You build a life around the script and then say, see, it must be true. But identity isn't destiny. It's just a well-practiced thought, and it can be rewritten, not all at once, not by brute force, but through suggestion. Gentle familiarity. That's the trick. Visualization becomes powerful here, not as some magic wish machine, but as identity rehearsal. If you consistently picture a version of yourself who shows up differently, who chooses the salad or the job application, or the boundary, you're giving your brain a new mirror. One that says, this is an option too. And if you start treating that version with respect, with normalcy, your behavior begins to bend toward it. Not because the universe responds to imagination, but because your neurons do. Eventually, the choices that felt out of character start to feel aligned. Not because you changed overnight, but because the image you were reflecting started to shift. So maybe the question isn't, what do I believe about myself? Maybe it's, what kind of self am I quietly rehearsing every day? Because if the mind likes to act like itself, you might as well decide which version you want it to become. You've probably heard of the placebo effect. You take a sugar pill, but your brain thinks it's medicine. And somehow, your symptoms improve. Pain decreases, mood lifts. Sometimes even real, measurable physiological changes occur. All because your mind believed something helpful was happening. It sounds like a loophole in biology, but it's not a glitch, it's a feature. And what makes it even more fascinating is this. It doesn't just happen in labs with white coats and clipboards. It happens everywhere, no pill required. Say you believe that taking a deep breath will calm you. It probably will. Not because the breath has magical properties, but because the belief has already cued your nervous system to prepare for calm. Say you walk into a room thinking you're going to connect well with others. You might stand taller, smile more naturally, listen with better attention. And guess what? People respond to that. It's not sorcery. It's biology, nudged into alignment by expectation. The body is constantly reading between the lines of your thoughts, quietly adjusting its chemistry to match what it anticipates. Neurotransmitters shift, heart rate adjusts, muscle tone changes. This is the placebo effect in action, just without the sugar tablet. Now, this doesn't mean belief is a miracle drug. You can't positive think your way out of a broken leg or cure illness by grinning harder. But it does mean belief plays an active role in your baseline physiology, not as a solution, but as a signal, a starting point. And the kicker, this same system works in reverse. If you constantly believe things won't work out, your body listens. You brace. You tighten. Your stress levels rise. This is sometimes called the nocebo effect, the expectation of harm leading to real discomfort. The power of belief doesn't vanish when you're being negative. It just gets repurposed into self-sabotage. So when we talk about manifestation, maybe we're not talking about summoning rewards. Maybe we're talking about cueing the body into readiness, that small biological yes that says, I'm paying attention, I'm preparing, I'm available. And that availability, it might be the real engine of change, not because it guarantees success, but because it nudges every system a half step closer to possibility. Not magic, not mysticism, just the human body quietly taking belief seriously. At some point, someone probably told you to visualize success. Picture yourself crossing the finish line, holding the award, getting the call. It's the stuff of motivational posters and self-help workshops. And often it gets dismissed just as quickly because it feels cheesy, detached from reality. Like you're trying to Photoshop your brain into thinking everything's already perfect. But here's the catch. Visualization isn't useless. Done right, it's surprisingly effective. Not because the universe is eavesdropping and rearranging itself, but because your brain is. When you imagine something vividly, engage your senses, feel the weight of the moment, walk through the scene, your nervous system starts to treat it like an event, not a daydream. This is called mental rehearsal. It lights up many of the same neural pathways as physically doing the thing. The brain doesn't always draw a sharp line between what's imagined and what's experienced, which means when you mentally rehearse an outcome, you're building familiarity. You're reducing hesitation. You're giving yourself a template to follow, So when a similar situation shows up in real life, your body and mind recognize it. Less panic, more fluid motion. Athletes do this constantly. They don't just picture the trophy. They picture the form, the mistake, the correction, the rhythm of breath under pressure. They're not manifesting success. They're preparing for it. And that preparation, the layered, realistic kind, is what separates helpful visualization from fantasy. Because here's the truth most people skip. If you only visualize the outcome, you're not really preparing. You're just daydreaming. But if you include the work, the effort, the stumbles and recovery, that's when the mind starts building a map. That's when visualization becomes practice. The brain likes what it knows. It finds comfort in repetition, even imagined repetition. So the more you rehearse a scenario, the less foreign it feels when it shows up. And when something doesn't feel foreign, you're more likely to act with confidence. Not because you know it'll go perfectly, but because you've already been there, at least in your mind. This isn't magic. It's readiness. That quiet sense of I can handle this, built slowly through repetition and realism. So if you're going to visualize something, don't just picture the win. Picture the climb, the stumble, the try again. That's the version your brain actually learns from. If you've ever tried to write an email while listening to a podcast, replying to texts, and trying to remember if you left the stove on, you already know the truth. Attention is not infinite. It's not a wide open floodlight. It's a spotlight, narrow and selective. And wherever that beam lands, that's what becomes your temporary reality. This isn't just a metaphor. It's basic brain logistics. Your sensory system is bombarded by millions of signals at any given moment. Sounds, sights, smells, internal thoughts, emotional undercurrents. It's too much to process all at once, so your mind filters, prioritizes, and focuses. It decides, often unconsciously, what matters. And what gets picked up by that filter shapes your day, your mood, and sometimes your whole belief system. Focus on what's broken, and you'll start seeing fractures in everything. Focus on what's promising, and your eyes will land on cracks of light instead. It's not because the world changed. It's because your attention shifted. The data was always there. Your brain just edited the scene differently this time. Here's where it gets more interesting. Attention doesn't just affect perception. It affects memory, emotion, and action. The things you notice more, you start to remember more. The things you remember more, you start to believe more. And the things you believe, well, they start nudging your choices, whether you realize it or not. Your attention is a kind of cognitive currency. Where you spend it, that's what grows. That's what gets reinforced, rehearsed, and repeated. And the cost of wasting it on distractions or fear is steep. Not just because it tires you out, but because it teaches your brain what to value. And attention is contagious too. The way you direct it influences how people respond. If you carry attention that's anxious, scattered, or defensive, others feel it. If you hold your attention on possibility, openness, or calm, it tends to ripple quietly but noticeably. So manifestation in this light becomes less about willing outcomes into existence and more about directing your spotlight. Less, I hope this happens, and more, I'm choosing to notice what I want to move toward. And the best part? You don't have to get it right every time. The moment you notice your attention has drifted, you're already back at the switchboard, able to adjust the beam again. Because attention isn't just what you see, it's what you choose to keep seeing. Humans are wired to find patterns. It's not just something we do for fun. It's a survival skill. If a rustling in the grass usually means there's a tiger nearby, then assuming a tiger every time might keep you alive, even if sometimes it's just the wind. But that same survival instinct gets weird when there's less at stake. You think about someone, and they text you 5 minutes later. You find a parking spot right after saying, "I just need a win today." Your brain connects the dots and lights up like, aha, I have powers. This is what psychologists call magical thinking. It's the belief that your thoughts, unrelated to any physical mechanism, can influence external events. And honestly, it feels good. It gives a sense of control in a world that's otherwise chaotic and rude. It tells you the universe is paying attention, nodding at your inner monologue and slipping you a freebie now and then. But here's the catch. Even when the link isn't real, the effects often are. If you believe you're on a lucky streak, you carry yourself differently. You take more chances, speak with more confidence, and show up with a little extra spark. People respond to that energy. Opportunities feel more accessible. And suddenly, you're in a positive loop. Not because the universe conspired to help you, but because you became someone worth betting on. That's the sneaky part of magical thinking. Even if the cause and effect is imaginary, the behavior it triggers can be very real. You visualize success. You start preparing. You assume things will go your way, and so you behave in ways that invite them to. Of course, the reverse happens too. If you believe you're cursed, your attention narrows to problems, you second-guess yourself, and you subtly close off from new possibilities. And guess what? The world responds to that version of you too. So maybe the value of magical thinking isn't in its truth. Maybe it's in its utility. It gives you permission to try, to hope, to risk. And that small nudge, that belief, however irrational, is sometimes just enough to get you moving again. So no, the green light didn't turn because you wished it. But maybe your wish got you out of bed, into your car, and ready to go when it did. And maybe, just maybe, that's all the magic you need. Imagine walking into a store. You see a watch priced at $1,200. You shrug and walk on. Then you spot another one for $300. Suddenly, that second one feels like a bargain. Not because $300 is cheap, but because your brain was anchored to $1,200. This is anchoring, a mental shortcut where the first number, idea, or impression you encounter becomes your baseline. It doesn't matter if it's random or absurd. Your brain will still cling to it like a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. It's not just about prices. Anchoring shows up in first impressions, self-talk, even your expectations for the day. If you wake up thinking, today's going to be a disaster, then anything short of catastrophe might feel like a relief. But if you start the day with, I'm going to crush this, and things go okay, you might still feel like you fell short. Anchoring sets the frame, and framing is what gives meaning to experience. It's the reason I failed feels crushing. But I learned what doesn't work feels motivating, even if both are true. Your brain craves consistency, not objectivity. It wants the story to line up. If you think of yourself as unlucky, even small setbacks become evidence. But if you reframe them as plot points in a bigger arc, your brain starts compiling a different kind of report. This is why some people seem to bounce back faster. It's not just resilience. It's a different default frame, one that interprets setbacks as temporary, effort as meaningful, and success as possible, even when the outcomes aren't guaranteed. Now back to manifestation. Anchoring plays a huge role in how we visualize. If your first mental anchor is "this probably won't work," then every small success feels like a fluke. But if you anchor with "I'm the kind of person who figures things out," even small stumbles feel like steps forward. Framing isn't about lying to yourself. It's about choosing the angle that keeps you in motion. You're still facing reality, but you're doing it with a lens that supports momentum instead of defeat. So maybe manifestation isn't some mystical rewiring of the universe. Maybe it's just anchoring your thoughts to possibility and choosing frames that move the story forward. Not perfectly, not always, but enough to shape the way you step into the next moment. And sometimes, that's all the shift you need. People love to say, actions speak louder than words, but truthfully, most actions whisper. They don't shout your beliefs, they leak them. Through your posture, your tone, your timing, even the way you start or avoid a sentence. This is where belief reveals its hand. If you believe you're not capable, your actions follow suit. You hesitate. You apologize before you've done anything. You speak softly, not because it's your style, but because you're preemptively shrinking, not consciously, but subtly, repeatedly. And on the flip side, belief in possibility nudges you into a different posture. It's not loud confidence. It's just a little more presence, a little more reach, a slightly longer pause before backing down. This is the core idea people miss about manifestation. It doesn't live in thought alone. It shows up in micro movements, in behavior. Not because thoughts cause things to happen, but because they steer the choices that might. You send that email not because you're sure it'll be well received, but because you believe it could. You speak up in that meeting not because you're fearless, but because the belief, maybe I have something valuable here, overrules the fear for just long enough to act. The world responds not to your inner monologue, but to the ripples of it, the way you show up, the way you hold eye contact or don't, the tone you carry into a room. None of it guarantees success, but it shapes your availability to it. This is why belief matters, even when it doesn't seem to work, because it tilts your behavior, not dramatically, just enough to create momentum, just enough to send a different signal. And sometimes that signal gets noticed. So if you're looking for proof that manifestation works, maybe look smaller. Look at how you held your shoulders in that conversation, how you asked a question you might have skipped, how you followed up, stayed curious, or tried again. It's not magic. It's alignment between belief and behavior, between thought and tone. And sometimes that alignment is the thing that tips the next domino. So maybe the question isn't whether your belief is strong enough to change the world. Maybe it's, is it strong enough to change your next move? Because that's where things start to shift. It's easy to get excited about positive manifestation. You think something uplifting, take aligned action, and life supposedly begins to match your vibe. But here's a question nobody likes to ask out loud. If manifestation is real, Why does it feel like the bad stuff happens faster? Why is it that you worry about failing a test and then you do? Or you assume that job interview went horribly and somehow you don't get the call? It starts to feel like your brain is a pessimistic genie, granting all the outcomes you didn't want. But the truth is more mechanical than mystical. Negative thoughts follow the same behavioral pipeline as positive ones. You expect a poor result, and your body responds. Tension builds. Your tone shifts. You become quieter, more hesitant, less engaged. And then the world reacts to you, not to your thoughts, but to the behaviors those thoughts caused. When you expect things to go wrong, you show up a little less open, a little less available. You avoid eye contact. You shorten your replies. You don't reach as far, not because you're being rude, because you're bracing, and others can sense it, even if they can't name it. This creates a loop, a quiet repeating system where negative expectations shape your presence, and your presence reinforces those expectations. Then the mind, being ever so helpful, takes that as evidence. See, I knew this would happen. And the cycle repeats. There's also the trick of memory. Negative experiences get logged more vividly. They stand out, feel heavier, and stick around longer. Evolution wired us that way. It's not because bad things are more frequent. It's because your brain prioritizes learning from pain, which means even one failure can overshadow a dozen neutral or positive moments. This isn't about blaming yourself for misfortune. It's about noticing that negativity can be just as good at manifesting outcomes, not because of cosmic laws, but because of behavioral consistency. The more you assume defeat, the more you unconsciously act like it's already happened. The antidote isn't blind optimism. It's curiosity. It's asking, is that fear actually helping right now? It's experimenting with the idea that something might go well, even if you're not sure how. Because if the brain is going to manifest anything, it's probably going to start with what you keep rehearsing. And sometimes the loudest rehearsal is the one you didn't even notice. There's a voice in your head. Not that kind of voice, don't worry. The regular kind. The one that comments when you burn your toast, mutters through awkward silences, and occasionally narrates your life like a bored documentary host. That voice is your inner monologue, and it might be the most persistent architect of your reality. We tend to treat that voice like background noise, just commentary, not construction. But language is powerful. Not just the words you say out loud, but the ones you whisper silently to yourself, over and over again. Your inner voice decides the tone of your experience. Say, I always mess this up, and the brain logs a recurring flaw. Say, that was a misstep, but I'm adjusting, and the brain hears movement instead of failure. Same mistake, different framing, different outcome. The way you talk to yourself matters, not because it magically changes the world, but because it changes your interpretation of the world. That interpretation shapes behavior, and behavior, repeated, starts to build your life. Over time, recurring thoughts turn into beliefs. I'm lazy. I'm not a people person. I can't handle stress. These phrases begin as observations, but the more often you repeat them, the more they feel like identity. And identity is sticky. But here's the good news. Language is malleable. You can't turn off the voice in your head, and really, you wouldn't want to. But you can change how it speaks. You can guide it, redirect it, interrupt it mid-rant and say, okay, but what else might be true? You don't need to jump straight to positive affirmations. You don't have to chant, I'm amazing, in the mirror if that feels absurd. But you can start by replacing absolute language with open-ended phrasing. I'm not good at this becomes I'm still figuring this out. That one shift from period to possibility keeps the window open. This is where manifestation works quietly, not in magic spells or secret mantras, but in micro adjustments to how you narrate your own story. Because your body listens, your habits respond, and your environment, whether it's people, systems, or opportunities, tends to follow the script you keep performing. So if you're going to be talking to yourself anyway, and you are, you might as well write a script that points in a direction worth walking, even if it's just one sentence at a time. You don't exist in isolation, even when you think you do. Every moment, you're participating in a quiet conversation with your environment, not just with words, but with presence, with posture, with tone. And the world, without even realizing it, responds to the energy you project. This is where reinforcement loops start. You think something about yourself. I'm not interesting. So you speak less. You shrink a little. You avoid interrupting. And people, sensing that subtle withdrawal, engage a little less. They don't ignore you out of malice. They just pick up the cues you're unconsciously giving off. And when they don't lean in, you take that as proof. See, I knew it. But the loop started with you. Social feedback isn't objective. It reflects what people perceive you to be, and that perception is shaped heavily by how you present yourself. If you carry yourself with quiet confidence, others tend to mirror that. If you apologize before you speak, others unconsciously treat your ideas as less certain. Your self-belief trains people how to treat you. This is not about faking it. It's about noticing the signals you're sending and deciding whether they match the story you want to live in. Here's a subtle shift. If you act with just a bit more presence, if you speak a little more clearly, hold eye contact a moment longer, or even stand like someone with something to say, people adjust. Not dramatically, but enough. That feedback loop starts echoing differently. Now they lean in, they nod, they treat you like someone worth listening to, and that behavior becomes your evidence. It reinforces your belief in yourself, not because you made anything up, but because you signaled something new. This is manifestation in social form, not mystical, not manipulative, just alignment. You believe a little, and you act a little differently. That action invites a new response which reinforces the belief. And around you go. Yes, the world is complicated. Yes, some rooms are colder than others. But many of the loops we live in are self-sustaining and therefore interruptible. The next time you wonder why people treat you a certain way, ask this: what are you unconsciously teaching them to expect? And if the answer doesn't sit right, maybe it's time to change the lesson plan. Because feedback isn't fate, it's a mirror. And mirrors can shift depending on what you bring into the room. Belief sounds like something soft, abstract, a mental decoration, maybe. Harmless. But under the surface, belief has consequences. It doesn't just hover in your thoughts. It speaks directly to your body. When you believe something stressful is about to happen, your brain doesn't pause to double check. It sends the signal, brace for impact. Your heart rate increases, muscles tense, Cortisol rises. Blood flow shifts to your limbs, preparing for a threat that might not even be real. All from a prediction. And on the flip side, believe you're safe or capable or just slightly more ready than you thought. And your physiology follows. Breathing slows, muscles relax, dopamine starts to trickle in. You become more available to the moment, less locked in survival mode. This is the biology of belief, not a metaphor. A literal system of neural and chemical responses that shift based on what you expect to happen. What's fascinating, maybe even a little unsettling, is how easily the body plays along. It doesn't wait for proof. It listens to the narrative and prepares accordingly. And over time, that preparation becomes a baseline. You start to live in a body that is shaped by your most rehearsed assumptions. This is why chronic fear or self-doubt doesn't just live in your head. It lives in your gut, your breath, your posture. The belief becomes your state. The opposite is also true. People who believe they can adapt, improve, or endure tend to show biological signs of resilience. Their systems recover faster. Their attention stays sharper. Not because of magical thinking, but because belief quietly changes the gear your body shifts into. That's not to say you can heal everything with a good attitude, but it does mean the mindset is more than mental. It's physiological readiness. And readiness, even in small doses, improves your odds of engaging well with the world. When we talk about manifestation, this is the foundation people miss. It's not about controlling the universe. It's about influencing the internal system that meets the universe every day, in every moment. So the next time you catch yourself anticipating disaster, pause. Notice what your body's doing. Then ask, what would change if I believed something different was possible, even just for now? Because your body isn't just reacting to the world, it's reacting to your beliefs about the world. And that changes the whole experience. Let's talk about the part no one likes to admit. Sometimes it doesn't work. You journal, visualize, show up with optimism. You shift your posture, change your inner monologue, retrain your confirmation loops, and still, no call, no win, no sign from the universe. Just the same old stillness. The same unanswered question sitting in your inbox called life. This is where most discussions of manifestation start to squirm, because the idea of it not working seems to poke a hole in the whole thing. But that's only true if you think of manifestation as a vending machine. Insert belief, receive outcome. Here's a more grounded truth. Belief doesn't guarantee results. It improves readiness. It adjusts your behavior, sharpens your perception, opens your posture to possibility. But it can't erase systems. It can't override randomness. It can't force timing. Reality has its own architecture. Sometimes you're just not in the right hallway when the door opens. And yet, this is also the moment that reveals what you really believe. Because if belief is conditional on immediate success, then it's not a foundation. It's a transaction, a bet. But belief that persists, especially when nothing's happening, is what reshapes the internal system. It's what builds capacity, patience, clarity. And those things, they aren't wasted. Even if the outcome never arrives, the version of you that was built in the process is often the point. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be disappointed. Disappointment is fair. It's part of the feedback loop. But it's not always a verdict. Sometimes it's just the terrain. You're allowed to want things and not get them. You're allowed to work towards something and not arrive. The power of manifestation isn't in getting everything you want. It's in who you become when you decide to believe anyway. Not forever, not blindly, but enough to keep moving. Enough to say, this wasn't the moment, but maybe the next one will be. Because the real danger isn't that belief fails. It's that people take its failure as proof that they failed, that their mindset was wrong, or their frequency was off, or they somehow jinxed it. Sometimes the path just isn't there yet. And sometimes, even when belief doesn't get you the result, it still gets you ready for what comes after. And maybe that's the part that matters. So, where does that leave us? No supernatural contracts, no secret levers to pull. Just a strange, powerful, pattern-seeking brain trying to survive in a world that doesn't always make sense. A mind that rehearses beliefs until they feel like facts. A body that responds to thought like it's an early warning system. Manifestation, when stripped of glitter and grandeur, becomes something quieter, slower, less about control, more about orientation. It's the direction of your attention, the tone of your self-talk, the posture of your expectation. And while none of that guarantees anything, it tends to shape what you notice, how you move, and what kind of responses the world sends back. Not because it owes you anything, but because you're simply showing up in a way that invites alignment. You may not conjure a mansion or fall into perfect love by visualizing it, but you might start asking better questions. You might walk into a room and notice the one opportunity you would have missed before. You might speak with a little more clarity and find someone who's been listening the whole time. Maybe that's not magic. Maybe that's attention doing its job. Repetition working in your favor. Belief acting as a kind of scaffolding while you build whatever comes next. And if none of it lands, if the job doesn't come, the door doesn't open, the yes doesn't arrive, then at least you've rehearsed a version of yourself that didn't default to doubt. You've given yourself the chance to show up as ready. Because sometimes the outcome isn't the reward. The reward is being the kind of person who still moves forward without needing the universe to send a parade. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Maybe it's enough to try, to believe quietly, without a guarantee, to shift your lens a little, to speak one word more kindly to yourself than you did yesterday. Maybe the real power of manifestation isn't about what you get, it's about what you practice. And maybe the real answer, whatever it is the silence that comes after the question, the space between thoughts, the stillness where something new might begin.